regards to Jesus, just an example, when he speaks to Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and Pharisees and Jesus really didn't get along well, but there were a few Pharisees who got along with Jesus and actually became Christians. Nicodemus is one of these men, was one of these men. And he's talking to Jesus, and Jesus is explaining to him how one enters the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is explaining to him how one can be saved. And he says, it's like being born again. And Nicodemus is like, I don't understand. And I just kind of want to, it's in John chapter 3. You don't have to turn there. I'm just going to read it really quick. Nicodemus says, how can this be? And Jesus answers, you are Israel's teacher and you don't understand these things? I tell you the truth, we speak of what we know and we testify of what we have seen. But still, you people do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak to you of heavenly things? So Jesus is saying, hey, I'm kind of dumbing this down. I'm kind of speaking to it in terms you're going to understand. I'm speaking to it in kind of in an earthly manner, not in a heavenly manner. If I speak in a heavenly manner, you're not going to understand. But if I speak in an earthly manner, you will understand. And even with that, we still have a hard time understanding, not only Nicodemus, but I think we all have a hard time understanding some of the spiritual concepts and truths, although they're put into our own language. So Jesus speaks about being saved in regards to being born again, because we're born once in this world, and then when you get saved, it's like having a new life. It's like you're a new person. It's like being born again. And the author of Hebrews kind of picks up on this, kind of piggybacks on this. What the author of Hebrews is saying, he's saying, you're like infants. He uses the word infants. Spiritually, when you're born again, you go through an infancy stage like you do physically. And as you get poured into and you're fed and you're taught and you go through your terrible 2s and 3s and 4s and you finally grow up, you mature and you become, a young man and woman and you continually grow. It's the same thing spiritually. When somebody first gives their life to Jesus and comes to know him, they are infants. And that's what this author is kind of picking back off of Jesus. And the author is speaking in a way that they're going to understand, and he uses the same imageries that Jesus uses. And there's nothing wrong with being an infant in Jesus, as long as it's in the proper time frame. In other words, if you were an infant like 10 years after you came to know Jesus, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe you need to work on something. Not maybe, you do need to work on something. I guess I could draw some pictures of infancy in practical matters. On Thursday night small group, I was talking with Lindsay, and I was talking to her about Bella, and I guess Bella, her little daughter, very recently graduated from training wheels. And now she can ride, she's no longer on training wheels on a bike. And that's quite an accomplishment for Bella. She's just a little girl. But if I just learn how to ride a bike without training wheels, that's not that big of an accomplishment. You guys see what I mean? Yeah. What's that? Another example is Jeremiah. Jeremiah is a baby here who was born here in this VX family very, very recently, and at that farewell party we had, he was there, and I mean, he had this bib on, and he's just drooling. I mean, his bib is just covered in drool. I mean, I touched the bib, to wipe his mouth, and it's soaked in drool. It's wet. The whole thing is wet. He's like a water faucet. It just keeps coming out. And, everyone thinks that's pretty cute, and it is. You see him, he's drooling, it just falls down, and, it's a cute thing. And another example is Caden. At the party, Ramon and Yvette obviously brought their newborn Caden, and, he made a little stinky, he's, oh, you made a little stinky, he's a kid. It's like, oh, that's cute. But if someone like me is sitting there drooling and making stinkies, that's not a good thing. That's not very good. I need to grow up. I need to move past this. And it's okay if you're an infant, but as you grow older, you need to grow up. And it's the same thing spiritually. It's not really cute spiritually if you've been in the Lord for 10, 20, 30 years and you're still an infant. It's kind of like, okay, we need to grow up. We need to move past this. So do you guys see the difference between infancy and maturity? Kind of how it's like physically? In a spiritual sense, it's kind of this same thing like I said. So a spiritual infant is a Christian who doesn't understand elementary things of the Bible, number one. And number two, an infant is someone whose life does not reflect Christ. And we're going to kind of see that drawn out when I get to the maturity part of it. But what does a spiritual infant look like who's been in the Lord for a long time? So they've been a Christian, but they've been a Christian for a long time, and they're just not getting with the program. What does it look like? When I try to think of an example, there was a first example that came to my mind. It was when I was, it was at my church that I grew up in. I was leading a youth group, so I was kind of involved with some of the leadership there. And there was an older couple there. They were probably there from like the 1950s when they got married. And they were in leadership still, and they were still at the church, and they were still alive. They were kicking. They're in their 70s, I think, somewhere in there. There was a meeting. I can't remember if probably early in the week, maybe mid in the week, maybe Monday, Wednesday. I don't know. But there was a meeting at church during the week, and we had this pastor, and the pastor had a son. The son was a teenager. He's in high school. He's rebellious. He wants to do his own thing. He thinks he's invincible. You know how the thing goes. We were all there, or we are all. Yeah, I think we were all there. Or we're all going to be there. Got a little baby over there. But during this prayer meeting, the pastor got a call that his son ran away from home. Nobody knew what happened to him. Nobody knows where he's at. So the pastor says, listen, I got to go. My son, I don't know where he's at. And this couple, the guy first, he's ripping him a new one. Oh, you can't leave. And he's just going on. And then his wife says, oh, my gosh, you can't leave. And they're just ripping into him. They're giving him the third degree for having to go find his son. And he doesn't know what to do. So he kind of goes off. He's crying. He doesn't know what to do. So I wasn't there. My mother was there. She goes up. She says, listen, you go find your son. I'll take care of it. So he leaves. Within that same week, before the next Sunday, within that week, he had a heart attack and never fully recovered from that heart attack, and a few months later died. And she, in that same week, fell down and broke her hip or leg or something like that. When you're that old, it takes a lot longer to recover. But that's kind of what happens when you stay as an infant. You're very immature. You don't know how to handle things. You're probably put in leadership when you shouldn't, when you have no business being in leadership, and you cause more damage to the kingdom of God than you do benefit the kingdom of God. And sometimes the more damage you cause, it's going to come to a point where God's going to probably take you home early. And in the man's case, God took him home early, and in the woman's case, she's still alive, but she's certainly doesn't give people any problems anymore. But there's serious things we have to consider about being an infant for too long. It comes to a point where God's going to maybe put his foot down and say, okay, it's time to grow up.